To start off our conversation, what is your assessment of how the sector has evolved in the last few years in Sri Lanka?
FinTech was very much around payments. We saw players like PayPal, etc., entering the industry. So essentially these tech-powered startup companies going after the revenue streams in financial services. Basically across the world, we've seen every single part of finance, all the way from payments all the way up to kind of private banking, institutional banking, the kind of top end financial services being disrupted or augmented. FinTech doesn't necessarily need to disrupt. It's a global phenomenon that runs at different speeds and has each market gets a different combination of fintechs, and each market has a different impact and different regulatory drivers as well. Sri Lanka has some great advantages when I look at the market. So I put my investor hat on. The population's fairly large, and so we could comfortably say that we could look at Sri Lanka in the kind of midterm to be worth tens of billions of dollars in terms of the valuation of the fintechs in country. So it's got a good domestic market. Obviously, it's got much larger markets surrounding it, which is a great opportunity. There's a whole plethora of startups and fintechs which may be able to solve that. So my point is just talk to them, have a look, get some to have a pitch, be a bit forgiving. You come from very different worlds, fintech and banks, and see where you can find some convergence, which is going to essentially speed up your digital transformation.
Fintech is one of Sri Lanka's fastest growing sectors for growth. We spoke about the potential of the sector with Neal. Stay tuned.
Some bonds give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
The latest issue of LMD is available at lmdmall.lk. You can also access the digital version on Press Reader, Maxter, our social media platforms and WhatsApp. The Voice of Business, a legacy of 30 years.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation today is fintech trends, and I'm here with the co-founder of PictureWealth and board member at Peppermint Innovation, Neal. Mr. Cross, it's lovely to have you on our show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a great honour to be invited onto the programme.
Neal, fintech is considered to be one of Sri Lanka's fastest growing sectors, and of course it has a lot of potential to drive significant economic development. To start off our conversation, what is your assessment of how the sector has evolved in the last few years in Sri Lanka?
Well, that's quite a big question, isn't it? So if we kind of go back in time, the early rise of fintech was very much around payments. We saw players like PayPal, etc., entering the industry. So essentially these tech-powered startup companies going after the revenue streams in financial services. Started in payments, there was a lot of white space. There was a lot of problems in payments. There was very difficult to do peer-to-peer payments, historically very difficult for small businesses to accept payments, very difficult to do payments online. And so they solved a need. And then obviously after payments, we started to see lending and P2P lending, crowd lending, and algorithmic scoring lending, so using different data to create credit scores, things like social media, telco, and behavioral data. And then I think we've basically across the world, we've seen every single part of finance, all the way from payments all the way up to kind of private banking, institutional banking, the kind of top end of financial services being disrupted or augmented. FinTech doesn't necessarily need to disrupt. A good 50% of fintech actually are not there to compete with banks. They're actually there to support them. They are technology product providers that banks can license, like they license providers today, and add them into their product and customer offering. So my point, each country goes at a different speed. Yeah. And now it's very much Sri Lanka's time. I feel we have markets which are highly oversaturated. Singapore obviously comes to mind, and others which are kind of half through that journey. We can kind of see what's happening. We see some interesting stuff in the Middle East, and then ones which are, I wouldn't say just starting the journey, but kind of in the lower elevations, if you will, in Sri Lanka. And but yeah, it's a global phenomenon that runs at different speeds, and has each market gets a different combination of fintechs, and each market has a different impact and different regulatory drivers as well.
I like what you said. It's time for Sri Lanka now. Of course, we've been through a lot of hard times, but like you said, it's time now. What global trends do you think that we can really capitalize on in terms of fintech today?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Sri Lanka has some great advantages when I look at the market. As I put my investor hat on. The population's fairly large. They're up to 22 million, which is, not far off the size of Australia, let's say. There's a lot of people still who aren't in the formal finance landscape. And so there's a lot of growth to be had in the long tail, especially out to the rural workers. The economy is on a good track. The country has great regulation. It has a great legal framework, brilliant in my mind, regulators and other government agencies, and it's really at that turn of growth. So I think the important thing really is to look at what's happened internationally. So how have fintech markets kind of rolled out globally? Where do they first grow? They tend to grow in payments. And then what's the job of the regulator? The regulator is to step in, start helping to bring the community together. Things like, obviously, the FinTech Forum with Lanka Pay is a foundational measure in building the fintech ecosystem. And for me, it's all about speed. It's how fast does Sri Lanka want to go? I remember in the early days in Singapore, we were going incredibly quickly because we had the banks, myself at DBS, the regulator, and universities working together to bring, for example, more accelerators into the country. So building these fintech-focused startup accelerators where early stage fintech companies can go in a space as well as a program, get a small amount of funding and be coached and mentored to grow their business and get to scale. So having the kind of key pillars of having things like accelerators, university engagement, corporate collaboration, I think is critical, and obviously investor funds. But for a market of this size, there is a lot of upside. That's the important thing, yeah. So it's a big enough market to have quite a substantial fintech industry. So if we look at Australia, is obviously a more developed country, but I'm not sure what the fintech industry would be worth here. But I'd imagine we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in valuation, yeah. And so we could comfortably say that we could look at Sri Lanka in the kind of midterm to be worth tens of billions of dollars in terms of the valuation of the fintechs in country. So it's got a good domestic market. Obviously, it's got much larger markets surrounding it, which is a great opportunity because unlike banking, traditional banking, fintech doesn't need branches, and so it doesn't need physical locations. It certainly needs licenses for new geographies. And so there's an opportunity for a player to enter a market and grow very quickly without having a history there or physical locations, because nearly all the growth in fintech, and the same with digital banking, is through digital distribution.
Neal, you spoke of the need for collaboration, to be collaborative. What are your recommendations on where we can actually begin to foster this culture of collaboration?
Wow, that's the $1 million question, that one. Actually, I joke. It's fairly simple. So if we just kind of and narrow the field down to banks and fintech companies. Both of them have to learn to work with each other. And initially it's difficult, don't get me wrong. Yeah, banks are all about rigor, security, scale, professionalism, compliance, etc. Whereas fintechs are about move quickly and break things, experiment, grow quickly, fake it till you make it. That doesn't necessarily mean those are bad things, because through that engagement, both of those cultures get to learn off each other. So banks maybe become a bit less bank-like, and a bit more startup-y, a bit more experimental. And at the same time, startups mature, they focus more on compliance and rigor and enterprise grade, software. And so initially you do have to be quite forgiving on both sides of that equation. Yeah. Because in Singapore in the early days, fintechs were complaining about banks, and banks were complaining about fintechs, and it wasn't solving the problem. Yeah. At the end of the day, both sides have got positives and negatives. Banks have huge scale. They want to innovate. They genuinely want to improve their customers' lives. They want to acquire customers at a lower cost. They want to understand their customers better. And fintechs can supply a lot of that. At the same time, fintechs want to get to scale. They want to become more mature. They want to grow quickly. They want to get end customers. And so there's differences, but there's a lot of, obviously, symbiosis between those businesses. And so we see, some banks around the world, or I've seen some work with like 50 different fintechs in different parts of the business. And so at the base level, I think, look, if you're a bank, probably the easiest on the bank side, right? So you're a bank and you say, hey, we're going to call ourselves innovative and we're in Sri Lanka. Okay. Well, if you call yourselves innovative, then host some fintechs in your bank building. Get fintechs to come pitch to you every month. Yeah. Don't just put the words in the press, you're innovative. Show us. Yeah. Show us that you're working. Just start talking to them. Start mentoring some of their CEOs. Start banking them. And through that, as you get to learn off each other, then you will find a lot of opportunity to work with. We're in an age where it's really all about speed and safety. And I think the safety thing, we've kind of put a lot of effort into that and a lot of money, and the compliance piece. I think we need to now look at the speed piece. So as a traditional bank, if you're trying to accelerate your digital transformation strategy, hey, it's going to go a lot quicker if you get these pre-built bits of Lego, if you will, from some of these fintech companies. So you can focus on, your real kind of compete advantage and the real tricky, problems you're trying to solve. But at the same time, you can go to market very quickly with a bolt-in fintech product that could solve that need today. And as a bank, it's hard, because banks, we tend to like to own everything. And so sometimes it can be a bit difficult going, I'm going to introduce someone else. It might be a partnership, it might be a JV, it might be a revenue share. So some of it is, it might be that the fintech is actually connected to the customer, but a lot of the time, the customer never even knows it's a fintech. You might have a fintech which is great for understanding sentiment of call center calls, and it just runs in the background and produces reports for you and lets you know how happy your customers are. Customers never know you use a fintech, So there's lots of areas in your business. If you look around, there's hiring bots in HR that are based on, banking roles. There's chatbots, there's data analysis, AI platforms focused on financial services. There's compliance and reg tech and anti-money laundering systems. All these things never touch a customer. They're just, that's just software you've got to have. But the beautiful thing is, as a bank, we've got a lot more options in where we can acquire that software. No longer do we just have to go to the big product providers, the big, hyperscalers or the big financial services independent software vendors. There's a whole plethora of startups and fintechs which may be able to solve that. So my point is, just talk to them, have a look, get some to have a pitch, be a bit forgiving. You come from very different worlds, fintech and banks, and see where you can find some convergence, which is going to essentially speed up your digital transformation.
It's time now to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about fintech trends.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
Welcome back to the show. We're in conversation with the co-founder of PictureWealth and board member at Peppermint Innovation, Neal Cross. Neal, you're no stranger to Sri Lanka, and from what you have observed and from your experience, what are the most significant challenges that you think are faced by the sector today in the island?
Look, there's always complexity around compliance and regulation, especially when it comes to things like cloud computing. A lot of these fintechs, not all again, but a proportion run their technology on the cloud. And so if you're in a market where putting workloads onto the cloud is difficult, then that may well slow down the adoption of these new innovations. That doesn't mean that it's going to stop it. Absolutely not. Some of those run on premise, but it does mean the options banks, either telcos are doing digital banks, retailers are doing digital banks. We've even seen large conglomerates in Asia doing digital banks. We've seen a property developer out of Dubai doing a digital bank. So a lot of industries are moving into this. That's going to be a base level thing that we kind of need to solve. I think secondly, we can go back to the perception thing. Is what I've seen work really well is just the acceptance that banking is going to be very different in 5 to 10 years' time. I mean, it's very different today to how it was. And there's probably not going to be as many banks or branches around. And so this is the time really not to kind of mess around so much, not to be slow, not to kind of half do a project. This is the time to really execute and nail the thing. Yeah, this is the biggest transformation that many financial organizations will do in their entire history, if not one of the biggest. Yeah, is moving to this new world where finance is mostly done basically over a phone line, yeah, compared with finance has mostly been done at a physical location on paper, or an agent going around villages, with a book. So it is a step change in the industry. And my guide is really the pitfall would be not to treat that with the level of seriousness that requires, and funding and focus from the boards and the executive teams to make that a successful transformation. At the same time, that it is all bets are off, yeah. But to be a bank, you don't need branches anymore. Now I know with Sri Lanka, still some work to do on digitization, but it's only going one way, yeah. And so smaller banks can end up being big banks, because historically the size of a bank has tended to be mandated by the branch infrastructure in most countries. That world's going, yeah. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the order of kind of size of bank in each geography changes through this transformation wave.
In one of your previous answers, you mentioned how it's very opportunistic that Sri Lanka is surrounded by bigger markets and bigger countries. If we were to position Sri Lanka as an attractive destination for investments, foreign investments in fintech, what direction should we take?
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? And a lot of this is rebrand's perception. Yeah, and so you've got a lot of countries that have certain perceptions about them which are not true. Yeah, they're just not true. But the world believes it, and hence everyone believes in it. So my point is, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% true. But how would Sri Lanka stand out? And what does it gain? I mean, obviously it's part of the bigger market, South Asia. So there's a plus. Yeah. I would imagine. There's some things around the legal code and Maybe there's some things around kind of business and foreign ownership, which could be a good, and visas as well would be a good play. So I think Sri Lanka is the underdog here, yeah? So if you want to take on, the bigger populations north of you, you have to kind of change the rules a bit. And that would be, now, believe me, I don't know on Sri Lanka's visa. I think visa's pretty easy to get. But if it was a nicer country to live in, that visas and doing business were much simpler to do, and tax was good, then that would make Sri Lanka maybe more advantageous than some of the other countries in South Asia. I think it's the kind of Singapore model. Singapore has that. It's seen as safer, easy to do business, but it's got more capital. Now, Sri Lanka doesn't have more capital, but funnily enough, through this process of helping to found the FinTech Forum, so many Sri Lankans, and actually many people I never knew were Sri Lankan, have reached out to me and said, oh, how can we help? So there's like a secret Sri Lankan army around the world. That not an army, obviously we don't talk about armies, but a network of the Sri Lankan diaspora maybe that could be brought to bear as well. It's not impossible, is my point. But to achieve that, it takes some level of ambition, which means that some things will have to change, and hopefully, those things will change in a good way and in a shorter time period, and that would I think create a lot of a competitive advantage there.
And what is your advice to those in finance, from leaders to professionals, to accelerate the growth of the sector in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think with that, digital transformation, as I said, is a huge, huge undertaking, and one of the hardest things. I think number one, it's not a technology transformation. Yeah, rule number one. Yeah. So if you're a leader, if you don't work in tech, or a CEO or on the board or anywhere in the organization, it's a business transformation for a digital world, and it needs to be treated like that. Yeah, tech is a big and important part of that, but it's certainly not even half of it. Yeah, really, we need to rethink our manufacturing, product distribution, pricing, how we think about our customers, how we think about our data, obviously how we think about our technology. And then we've got things around our culture. How are we more collaborative? How are we more customer-centric? How are we more data-driven? How are we more agile and innovative? And so that kind of focus on, it's important, it's the entire business. And second thing is every part of your business needs to transform. It's not just, hey, we're going to build a digital bank up here and then we're kind of finished. No. Finance needs to change. Risk, credit, how technology operates needs to change. Yeah? How obviously the customer-facing businesses need to change as well. Every single part of the bank has an opportunity to improve. Doesn't have to be dramatic. And another point I'd make is you can never go wrong by really focusing on the customer and what problems are you solving for that customer. Yeah, because there's a lot you can do. Yeah, and there's a lot of consultants. They go and help banks transform, give them a big shopping list of. But my guidance would be just like pick a few problems you're solving for a customer and solve them really well, yeah? And also think about your business. What problems are you solving for your business? Don't just kind of rush ahead. Go, right, we're going to do this massive transformation, full steam ahead for the next 2 years. It's be very thoughtful on what's going to give you the biggest ROI, yeah? And my final thing is, it's all about the data, yeah? It's all about the data. Your greatest asset as a finance organization was two. One is your staff. Secondly, it's your customers. And third, it's your data. The data is so critical. And often in digital transformations, we tend to start that a bit late. With no data, there's no AI. With no data, very little process improvement. Data is everything. That's your entire business is data now. It's not bricks and branches and ATMs, it's data. So I think, yeah, there's probably a lot I could cover, but I think that's probably enough for today.
We've been in conversation with the co-founder of PictureWealth and board member at Peppermint Innovation, Neal Cross. Neal, thank you very much for that lovely and insightful conversation.
Thank you. It's been great chatting to you. Bye.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram and X. Thank you for watching and stay safe.